Dit is goeie Vrydag, 29 Maart. Ek hoop jy geniet 'n lekker breek en 'n aangename lang naweek en 'n geseënde Paastyd. Ons gaan aan met The Long Lost Grave. 3 hours later, the dusty white Datsun left the park at high speed. They had wasted little time other than to change into hiking gear, pack their backpacks and had a quick lunch. Warden Opperman was informed on the way out. A good-natured scowl was the only objection from him, and a cup of coffee each was forced upon them by Aunt Hertie. And from the curious speculative glances, it was clear that she was well informed as to Cathy's latest interest. But for the first time, for as long as Cathy could remember, she seemed curiously without objections. But Rob obviously remained under close scrutiny. Cathy swung the Datsun on the same forest road where they had first met. Fortunately, the little used road was fairly dry and less dangerous. On the other hand, it incited the ranger to even more daring speed, while Rob silently prayed whenever a turn loomed up ahead. But Cathy knew the road as well as she knew the dust-trailing vehicle and skid around those bends and turns with an apparent ease and calm, as if she was pushing a shopping trolley in Checkers. She grinned wickedly as they approached the stream of the near-disastrous first meeting. With a vicious shake of the head, she sent her hair back over her shoulders and a mysterious glint in her eyes. She mused aloud. That son of a bee. Yeah, Rob muttered, reckless woman, and with that he slipped a hand over her thigh and gave her a pinch. Rob, stop that, or we'll have a real accident. He chuckled mischievously. No, she fenced laughingly. You are my son of a bitch. Rob grunted. Very well. Still, you are one reckless driver. Then he saw something. Stop, he urgently called. Cathy hit the brakes and the Datsun skid sideways, dust following up and past them. Why, what? She demanded suspiciously, searching the road. We are here. He growled painfully as he dragged himself upright from under the dash. That, he grumbled, rubbing his head, was one hell of a stop. That should teach you to keep your hand to yourself. Well, we'll see about that, lady, he promised. Come. Night time. Cathy laughed at his threat and reversed the Datsun off the side of the road. Don't you think we should get going? She teased, and he grunted. Woman! But he had to laugh as she lifted their backpacks to the ground. Within moments after leaving the vehicle, the forest swallowed them. Rob followed more or less the same route along the stream with which he had come the previous time. With Cathy close on his heels, he hacked his way through the dense forest vegetation. The greens stood lush and high, the large feather-like leaves of the ferns reaching shoulder height in the damp Tsetsikama forest with its enormous trees. It was warm and humid, and they were soon sweating profusely under the burden of their packs. The moist air smelled fresh with the scent of the forest. High above, flecks of sun could be seen through the leaves of the evergreens, but down below it was dark and gloomy. Cathy followed quickly, watching Rob's back as he swung the machete, clearing away the young saplings and foliage. To her dismay, he had once again donned that miserable slouched hat, and she could see the sweat staining its base around the crown. As she liked watching him, marveling at the muscles playing in his shoulders and arms as he worked, and it filled her with wonder that such a strong and powerful built man could be so gentle at times, and her heart was full of love and tenderness. But despite the rough terrain and hard going, they were making good time. They stopped twice for a drink from the cool mountain stream and a cigarette for Rob, but the descending sun urged them onwards at an arduous pace. Then darkness fell as the sun dropped behind the Koga Mountains. They stomped to the clearing at the poolside and waterfall. "This is it," Rob grunted and dropped his backpack. Beside him, Cathy stood staring at the wondrous scene, breathing heavily. "Fantastic!" she exclaimed with delight and wiped a strand of hair from her forehead. "Wonderful! Oh, look at the pool and the fall. Isn't it beautiful?" Rob chuckled and lifted her backpack from her shoulders. "It is, but the water is awfully cold though. Look, there's a cave," and he pointed out the dark opening. The curtain of cascading water was less than a previous time and the opening more clearly visible. "Ooh," she gasped with delight. "Can we go in?" "Right now?" "Can we? It's so exciting." He grinned. "Okay, but I've been thinking of our camp. We can sleep in the cave." She hugged his arm enthusiastically, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Inside, behind the fall, ooh, so romantic. The cave is sandy inside, isn't it?" He blinked at her in surprise. "But Cathy, there's a dead man in there." That checked her for a moment or two, but she wasn't that easily stopped. "That's not too bad. After all, he has been dead for a long time, and we can sleep well to one side. Close to the water." "Oh, come on," she pleaded. "Let's do it." "Okay," he nodded grimly. "But once inside, there's no change of mind, okay?" With boots and pants discarded, they waded thigh-deep through the cool water towards the cave. Rob glanced back at Cathy and smiled. She bit her lip as the cold water became slightly deeper, until it just reached her navel. Rob grinned and she splashed water at him. "I'm but a poor man of flesh and blood." "Close your eyes. And how do you want me to cross? With boots and pants?" she retorted with indignation as he helped her up into the cave. The only answer he gave was an unsuspected kiss on her lips, and she smiled. "I thought so," she mused and let her shirt down over her hips. Rob flicked the switch of the torch. The beam shot out, casting its light spot on the white, sandy floor, and again he experienced that peculiar feeling of superstitious awe. She shivered involuntarily, and for a moment he could swear his hair stood erect. She slowly played the beam over the interior. Beside him, Cathy's breath quickened, and a soft gasp escaped her lips as it came to rest on the bleach-white skeleton and evil grinning skull. He reached for her hand and pressed it. "There he is, Captain Lord J.S. Martins, captain of the HMS Liberty." In silent awe, Cathy stared at the bones, suddenly overwhelmed by the mystery behind it all, the ship, the gold, the storm, and finally the lonely death here in the cave. Then 200 years later, Rob had stumbled onto the long-lost grave by pure accident, and she had fished out the ship's bell. And the wheels started rolling. A new race for the gold. "Here," Rob said quietly and handed her torch. "I'm going back for the packs." "Rob, do you think—" The beam darted vividly over the skeleton. "I'll be right back." He dismissed her sudden doubt. He went twice across the pool to fetch large arms full of wood, and by the time he got a small fire going inside the cave, it was dark outside. The wood was damp, causing a little smoke, but fortunately it drifted along the sloped roof and out through the fall, leaving the cave dimly lit up by the flickering yellow flames. Eyes large and shining in the firelight, Kathy watched fascinated as Rob carefully placed his fire-blackened kettle on the coals, rearranging the flames around it. Finished, he grinned at her as he took a camel filter and lit it with a flaming stick. Inhaling deeply, he grunted with satisfaction and tossed the stick back into the flames. She smiled warmly. "It's not too bad, is it?" "No, it isn't. I must say, this was a good idea of yours." "Not afraid anymore?" She shook her head. "No, not anymore." But he saw the misgiving in those large eyes as she glanced at the gaping skull. "Well, while we wait for the water to boil," he gestured deeper in, "why don't we search for what we have come for?" Together they knelt beside the skeleton. The bones were in slight disorder as a result of his search the first time. He carefully cleared it to one side while Kathy stared wide-eyed. Then he carefully stared, scraping the sand away over a 2-foot area, raking deep with his fingers. For various moments, nothing but their anxious breathing could be heard in the weird silence. Now and then a soft cradle came from the fire, with the soothing murmuring of the waterfall in the background. Both were fully aware of the implications of this search. If they found it, the gold would be theirs. If not, everything else or everything would be lost. Rob stopped because his fingers had touched something deeper down. Quickly he scooped double handsful of sand away, until at last he reached the object. Awed, they stared at the square wooden box with its strips of lead. It was a box which was used to be aboard a ship and in which secret papers were disposed of overboard to prevent falling into enemy hands. And the presence of this box was significant. It should certainly contain all the papers and documents they needed. Is it? Kathy stuttered, and he nodded. The answer to it all. "But how did you know it was here, under the bones?" Rob smiled thinly. He had written it in the logbook, but we kept on reading over the message, and he quickly explained the mystery to her. Still, no one had touched the box. It was as if there was an awesome presence of something sinister. A slight feeling of fear and foreboding, as they both remembered the blood and mystery the gold had caused in the past. Wouldn't it be better to rebury the box and forget all about it? And thus steer clear of the trouble? Kathy shrugged, her eyes large and quizzical. Jos Visagie, the crew, all the others. A farm, and Rob breathed in deep. That decided the issue once again. Their farms and the future, and for that they must have the gold. He reached out and lifted the box from the shallow grave. The secret. His fingers were slightly trembling. Kathy's eyes were abnormally large. Rob carefully refilled the hole with sand and painstakingly replaced the bones as best he could, and feverishly hoped that the old captain would forgive them with intrusion and not cast about some supernatural wrath. As he was appalled by his own superstition. "Let's get away from here," he muttered thickly, and then hastily made for the fire. "Phew," she breathed with relief. "Now for some strong coffee." Kathy stirred fresh coffee grounds into the boiling water, while Rob added more wood to the fire. And between the two of them, they prepared a first-class dinner, which they rounded off with a stiff whiskey, sitting side by side in their sleeping bags. "Marvelous," Kathy sighed happily and contently, grinning at Rob. "When are you going to open it?" The lead-weighted box was still unopened. He momentarily gazed at her curious face, seeing his own anxiety reflected in it. "Right now," he said, and reached for it. The wooden box was dry and the seams distorted with age. The lid stubbornly stuck, and Rob used his hunting knife to ease it open. With a creaking sound, the lid came away. Excitedly, they looked in the little square box. It was filled with dusty old papers, rolled into 3 separate bundles. And in the dim light of the fire, he could see that some of the age-colored pages were those torn from the logbook. Although hard and frail, it opened miraculously intact. Pulses racing with excitement and anticipation. Unable to speak, they watched, awestruck, as Rob cautiously fingered the bundles. Something underneath caught his eyes, and he removed the papers. Cathy gasped, "Look!" And Rob stared. There, on the bottom, lay 4 more of the gold coins, glistening in the flickering firelight. Gingerly, he lifted one out, the same as the first one, and the pureness of the precious yellow metal did not even allow one speck to dirty it. He dropped it in Cathy's hand. "I need a drink," he grumbled and fumbled for the whiskey. "Me too." "What about these papers?" she asked minutes later over her mug of whiskey, and Rob shrugged. "We are only going to damage it if we try to read it now. Back at the camp, I have chemicals to treat the paper, and there we can work under much better conditions as well." Cathy nodded. It makes sense, but she couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. Rob grinned. "Patience, my girl, patience. We have made a wonderful discovery. 4 more coins and many more documents. And girl, I assure you, the secrets to the treasure is in here. And before this week is out, we are going to have it." "Still, I am burning with curiosity and impatience," she replied, as he carefully replaced the contents in the box before showing it deep into his backpack. "Hey girl," he told her, "we got what we came for, and that's more than enough excitement for one day. It's time to hit the hay." Her khaki shirt shifted slightly, allowing him a full view of her black panties. Rob stared unashamedly, swallowed hard, and felt his own body coming alive. "I thought you were full of promises and threats earlier this afternoon." Her voice had taken on a husky quality, and a shy half-smile played on her lips. He didn't reply, but seized her almost roughly to him, bruised her lips hungrily with his, and his hands awkwardly fumbled with her remaining clothes. Then she suddenly stiffened. Concerned, he watched her face and saw the sudden anxiety in her eyes as she glanced apprehensively deeper in the cave. "Rob, do you think he can see us?" "Who? What?" "Him." She gestured to the gleaming skull with empty eye sockets. Then, fumbling about her, she grabbed the nearest piece of clothing and hurled it towards the skull in a vain effort to cover it. The first piece missed. The second didn't. Her black panties settled over the skull, covering the empty sockets and grinning mouth. Cathy giggled. "That's better. Now he can't watch us. We better be quiet so that he can't hear us." "Oh, Cathy, he has been dead for 200 years. And glancing sideways at the skull, half covered by the flimsy pair of black panties, he shivered involuntarily with a sudden premonition. But he dared not think about that. He lost all interest in other than his love for her and the sensations she evoked in him. Sleep didn't come until the early hours of the next day. Only then it was quiet in the long-lost grave. Jy met jou Paasnaweek geniet. Ek gaan maandag weer aan met The Long Last Grave. Dankie vir jou ondersteuning, dat jy like, subscribe, share en die belbutton druk.